Hello, hello.
Hey,
How's it going, Gail? Wally, I haven't seen you in at least 12 hours.
I
I had quite the editing project today with that stuff yesterday.
yeah. But you've got the music track along the top, so everything is referenced to it, right?
Yeah, well, and Donald sent me the stems for it, which was, I don't know whether that was worth my time or not, because, when he said I could send you stems, and I thought, it'd be nice to mix the music around the vocals a little bit rather than just sticking it on top. But the stems were about 80 tracks. And so it was like, I was very proud of myself because I did exactly in the next project that we do. We're going to talk about a mixing template and importing tracks into that, and why that's kind of easier than just starting from scratch each time. And I went through the exact process that I had written out in that project, and I was very pleased. I was like, okay, I was accurate in what I was writing. Like, that's how I work. But man, it was just like, okay, yeah, wow, there's another keyboard layer. Oh, another keyboard layer. Oh, another keyboard. So it was a lot.
Did you end up mixing it or going back to the?
Yeah, no, I mixed. I mean, once I started that, there was no going back. I was like, I've come too far. I did on occasion go back and check my mix against. I just muted all of the stems and played the reference track, and I was like, okay, it's a little better. I don't know if it was worth the effort, but it is better. So
Too bad you couldn't get your class to do it as an assignment.
yeah, right. I thought about that after I'd done it. I was like, oh, we should have just scheduled a 7-hour block, and we could have done this project together.
It's all Les Paul's fault.
Yeah, right. Otis, how are you, my friend?
All is well. I hope everyone else is doing well also. Thank you.
How are your new speakers?
I haven't gotten a chance to play with them because we're doing a renovation and they're doing the bathroom now. But they're pretty spectacular. I listened to them in this high-end boutique stereophile place that was selling them on eBay. And the guy that owns the place told me that if he hadn't put them up for sale, for auction, he would have kept them himself. He said they compare well with like the $25,000 A-note audio notes that he has in the shop. So
very cool.
I'm very happy.
Excellent. James and Elaine, nice to see you both. So
hi, I'm with you. Hi.
Okay, good. So before we get going on anything, I just thought I'd ask if anyone has any questions from anything we covered yesterday, or if I know some of you worked on the project, some of you didn't have time to, and that both of those are fine. But if anything came up in that process that we'd like to look at, I'm going to go through and do all those edits with you here at the first part of our class today. But if anyone has any questions before we dig into that, I'd love to field it.
I have a question about this class. Should we have Pro Tools up and running?
Well,
segment.
It's tough on Zoom. So if you have two devices and you can have Zoom on one and Pro Tools on the other, then you can follow along. If you're trying to do it on one device, what we learned the first time I taught this over Zoom, we learned in the first 10 minutes of that class that it's just not possible, which is why we do the video replay of it. So you can process the information now, and then when you have time, you can go back and kind of pause and select and actually do the edits. So that's not really an answer, but that's what I know.
That's an answer.
Anybody else, or should I just dig into this session? All right, well, let me share a screen here. Gotta select high quality sound. Okay. It's left over from yesterday's recording session. And let's see here. I will start from the setup we did yesterday. So that's going to be current show. Virtuals class 2022. This is I hate. I'm sure that's fine with this right. So this session has everything that we did last night in it. So with the addition of the markers are in place. So all the tracks are imported. They're in order. They're all routing to a mix bus. The mix bus is solo bypassed. And if I hit play,
How you say my name?
we could hear that. I'll turn that metronome off. And I think I have confirmed my grid looks good. Okay. So we're in a good spot to start going here. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to ultimately cut the first verse, but the billet was we want the lyrics from verse 1 to appear in verse 2. So I want to make sure that I'm in grid mode. I learned this today. I should have learned this yesterday. I can zoom in. Is that zooming for you guys? How fancy is that? So grid mode here. Wow. Okay, well, I'm learning no problems with that. I'm in grid mode, which I can either click on, or if I wasn't there, I can hit the F4 key, which is the shortcut for grid mode. It's important to make sure that my edit and timeline selections are linked, which they are. That's my default operating mode. And I'm in my smart cursor, so I'm ready to go here. What I'm going to do is I am going to make the audio track a little bigger, and I'm going to zoom in horizontally. I'm using the T shortcut. You know, I don't think I covered this yesterday. In the section of the screen, let's try to zoom in here. Right here, there's a little orange AZ icon here. That is called command focus, and that's what allows you to use these commands that are just a letter on the keyboard and not the command key and something. So I can zoom in just by pressing T. I'm not pressing Control T or R to zoom out. If this isn't selected, if I click and turn that off, I can hit those letters all day long and it won't do anything. So if you're ever trying to do something, just remember Avid's design philosophy is make the really important features very difficult to see. It's,
Excuse me, Andrew, where
Yes,
are
sir.
you clicking to turn that on and off?
at the top right hand part of the tracks menu. Let's see if I can get this zoomed to work. There we go. There's a little orange icon I'm circling with my mouse here. Can you see that? Is that zooming for you guys?
I can, the Zoom windows were blocking it. I see it.
Okay. So that is the command focus, edit keyboard focus, excuse me, they call it. And the reason that exists is you can put keyboard focus to clips, and then if I were to pass the letter P, that would just select my clip over here that was closest to P. Or I could also put these groups over here in the bottom left hand. I could put those into a keyboard mode. And there are some workflows, mainly in the film world, where people work that way, and they prefer to be able to enable and disable groups using the alphanumeric keys on the keyboard. But for our purposes, I will always keep this engaged because I prefer that shortcut feature set to any of the other ones.
And that just allows you to do a single letter on the keyboard?
Yes. And so if you in the paperwork I sent you, there's one of those guides that talks about the command focus shortcut set, and that's what these are. So R and T will zoom out. If I have an edit selection and I press P, that'll move up the track. The semicolon key moves it down the track. There's about 22 of them that are mapped across the keyboard here. You can get a little printout. You can actually get, if I still have it somewhere. I think it's out with one of the rental systems. You can actually get keyboards with the commands printed on them. I used to do that because it's just handy to have, but they don't make those in Bluetooth. So
And what happens if you go to a field and you?
Yeah, Otis has it. There you go.
Beautiful.
What was that
happens,
one?
what happens if you
What?
go to a field and start typing in like a name of a track or something like that?
That's
Does-
fine. As soon as you get into a text field, that overrides.
Okay.
So, and the only place that could get you into, that gets me into trouble, I should say, if I turn on one of my options here, this is the visibility column for the tracks info here. One of the options is comments, and this is really useful. You saw me yesterday in the recording session doing this, where I was, just typing little notes to myself about what was on that track. So if I've started to type in here and I haven't hit the return key, my space doesn't work for playback, my zoom doesn't work, and I start going, what the heck's going on? And then I end up with this very bizarre message in the comment field that I forgot about. And the other thing that annoys the living heck out of me is I work a lot in Sibelius, which is Avid's music notation program. And when you type something in Sibelius, to finish that process, you hit escape. Escape is I'm finished typing and I'm going to move on to something else. If I type very important info in here and hit escape, it cancels. So it's the same company and completely opposite effect of it. You can't hit return on Sibelius because that gives you a new line of text, but you can't. There are no carriage returns in this field, so hitting return gets you out of it. So anyway, that's my pedantic rant for today about Avid's lack of consistency in their product UI. Verse 1 vocal, we're going to move to verse 2. So I've got a marker at where verse 1 starts, and I've got a marker where verse 2 starts, which is also the end of verse 1. There's no chorus in between them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this vocal track between those 2 points. And there's several ways to do it. I could just click and hold down and drag and then lift up when I get to, I stopped a quarter note shy of where I needed to be. The waveform fooled me because there's a quarter note pickup in the next verse, which is fine because if I hold down the shift key and click again, I can add on or take away from that selection. So there I have my even 9-bar selection. It's odd that these are 9-bar verses and not 8. But remember, we discovered there's a 2/4 bar in here. So if I look at my transport up around my counter up here at the top, I can see a start at bar 1, beat 1, and bar 10, beat 1, and a length of 9 bars and no extra beats there. That also is good information to because if I think I've got it here and I see my length is 8 bars and 3 beats, I know I'm not right. Another way to do it is I could click on where I want to, well, actually I could click anywhere on this track. I could bring up my memory locations, which I can do by either hitting Command and the number 5 on the numeric keypad, not the numbers above the letters, but on the numeric keypad. Or if I don't have a numeric keypad, I can just go to Windows and pull down memory locations. So this will move my cursor. So I'm clicked into the vocal. The vocal track is selected here. So if I click on verse 1, that's going to move that selection to verse 1. And if I hold shift and click on verse 2, that's going to select all of the space between verse 1 and verse 2, between those 2 markers. So that gives me the sum total of verse 1. Now, I'm missing at the beginning, I'm missing her pickup here, and I'm grabbing a pickup into the second verse that I don't actually want here, but I'm not going to worry about that now. That's going to be really easy to fix later. And editing to the grid rigidly and not worrying about those is actually going to prove a little easier. And it'll be very simple to clean up a little later. So now that I've got this, I want to separate this collection, this edit selection. I want to make this a separate clip from the rest of the vocal. Right now, this whole vocal track is just one clip, one audio file represented by one clip. But I can separate that, and there are 2 ways to do the same thing. We can go to Edit, Separate Clip, and at Selection, meaning separate the clip at these at the selection point. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna break the clip at the start and end point of my selection here. And so now this single audio file is represented by 3 clips. I've got a small clip at the beginning of the song. I've got my verse 1 and I've got verse 2. I'm gonna undo that, get back to a single clip, restore my selection, verse 1, shift, and verse 2. The other way I could do that is just use the shortcut, which is the Command and the E key. Command and the letter E. And that's the same function, separate at selection. So you can see each of these clips has a name now. It's vocal-01, vocal-02, and vocal-03. And if I close my memory locations and I look at my clip list over here, I see the bold vocal. Everyone see what I'm pointing at here? In this list, these bold ones are the actual audio files. And these 3 that are not bold, those are edit selections. Those are essentially little edit decisions that I've made on my timeline. And as you go through and do a lot of editing, you can have hundreds of these that'll appear in here. And more or less, you don't need to come and deal with them in this list, although in the occasions that you do, this is where you come to it. What matters for right now is I want to remember what this is. So I'm going to rename the selection. And I'm going to do that just by double clicking on it. Now, I'm in my smart cursor, which means when I'm above the center line, I'm on my selector. So I can't use my selector tool to name it because that's all it does. But if I go below the center line and I get the grabber, I get that hand, I can now double click. And that will give me the opportunity to rename this. The other thing I could do is just with any cursor, I can right click on the clip and scroll down, and there's there's a lot of tools in this contextual menu. You can take a look at that and the things you can do there. But one of the features is rename. It's a little quicker in my mind to just double click on it, but whatever works for you. So I'm going to name this V1 Vox, first one vocal. So now I know what that is. I have a selection. And what I want to do is just position this to start at the verse 2 marker. So the easiest way to do this is to, using my grabber tool, just grab, drag, and drop. The audio that was underneath here, that verse 2 vocal that I've just covered up, will not play. We will not hear that, but it is not gone. If I move this away, it's still there. And there are other ways of getting at it, which we'll see later when I fix this edit point here. This is the heart of non-destructive editing. All these things I can do here, I'm making what would be very permanent changes in an analog editing method. If we were cutting tape here, this would be very hard to undo. But of course, in the beauty of the nonlinear editor is that almost virtually everything we do is non-destructive. In fact, the only truly destructive edit you can do to an audio clip inside Pro Tools is if you zoom in and redraw the waveform with your pencil. Once you've done 50, however many levels of undo you have set up on your computer, I have 50 levels of undo. So once I've done 51 commands after that, there's no way I can undo that. That'll exist permanently as part of that source audio file, which is one of many reasons why I don't draw waveforms with the pencil. But I digress. Okay, so my verse 1 vocal is now sitting in between the verse 2 and chorus 1 markers. That's good. There's a little orphan clip here at the top. We're just going to delete this. No worries about. There is a little bit of audio on that we need, but we're going to get that back later, so we don't have to worry about that. The next thing we want to do is we want to create this acoustic guitar intro, and we're going to use the first 4 bars of the verse 1 acoustic guitar for that. So let me just listen to that. Memory locations back. Verse 1. So he's a little ahead of the beat here, and I'm not going to worry about that as I do this edit because I can restore whatever I'm going to trim off here just the same way I'm going to do it on the vocal. So I'm gonna use my grid to my advantage here and not worry about what's hanging over it for the moment. So I want 4 bars of this. So what I'm gonna do, I'm clicking at the verse 1 point. I'll make this a little bigger for you guys. Zoom in a little bit. I'm gonna click here and I'm just gonna start dragging, and I'm looking for 2 things. I'm looking at my ruler up here, which shows me, I see my target is actually gonna be bar 5, right? Because I want a total of 4 bars. And I'm also looking at my length up in the counter up top here to show me how many bars I have in my selection. So holding down the shift key and clicking again to resume this edit selection, or I could just click at the beginning and start again. Click and hold and drag, and I'm at 4 bars there. I know that because my length shows as 4 bars in the transport, and I can see I start at 1 and I end at 5 here. When the edit selection is in place, you see this blue arrow and that orange post row flag. I just turned that off. Is kind of obscuring my view, but if I see 4 and 6, I can make a reasonable assumption that that should be 5 there. I need to separate this clip. I'll use Command E. I need to rename this clip. I'll double click again, and I'm going to call this guitar intro. Okay. Now, what we need to do, this is the start of verse 2, where in the marker ruler up here it turns purple, and where the vocal starts and everything. And my guitar intro ends at bar 5 here. So I need to remove some space from here. There are a couple ways I could do this. I could, I'll demonstrate the way that I don't want to do it, just so you see what's possible. I could use my all group. We talked about this in the last class. By default, Pro Tools will create a, the Zoom doesn't work well when I've got a second screen, I'm discovering. So when you create a new session, it will automatically create this group that's called all here. And that is, if I enable it by clicking on it, so it's highlighted now, you can see, any edit selection I do, or any mix change I do for that matter, will affect all of the tracks. We used it yesterday to set all of our faders to -10. In fact, I see my startup session has a little error here. It's the metronome set to -10 too. So I could use my all command, and I could grab the audio that I want to get rid of, which is between bar 5 and the start of verse 2. And I could put myself into shuffle mode using the edit mode selector up here to go to shuffle. You could also do that with the F1 key. And if I hit the delete key now, what that's going to do is it's going to delete these 5 bars on all the tracks and take everything that is to the right of them on the timeline and shift it left to the start of this edit point. So just watch as I hit this key. So that has accomplished the goal of transitioning me from this new guitar intro to the start, to our new start of verse 1. I'll play this. It won't be smooth because we got to smooth it out though.
How you think
So that needs some work, but that does do what that is the course edit that we need to do, and we could go fine tune it. The problem with doing that is all of my markers that I've set up and these bars that I have changed the meter in, all my meter changes here, are no longer valid now because I've shifted my entire file against the timeline. And actually for probably several years of editing that I did that, and I would just then go back and move all that stuff, which is a real pain in the ass. But that was kind of the way things got done. And then I learned there had been a feature since near the very beginning of Pro Tools, which is called cut time. And so what we want to do, and what the handout describes, is we want to select the area that we're trying to get rid of. So that's between the end of the guitar intro, which is at bar 5 here, and the start of verse 2, which is at bar 10. And that's a 5-bar selection. I see that. And I'm going to go to event menu, time operation submenu, and choose cut time. Oops, come back here. There you go. Cut time is very simple. Start time for the edit point, end time for the edit point, and the length of that. And it populates that data with what you've got selected. If I didn't do the selection right before, I could in theory type this in here. But to be honest, I want to be sure about what I'm doing. So I would do it. I would make sure my selection is correct. And then what do I want to do? Do I want to just change the meter rule, or do I want to change all of the rulers and all of the tracks? That's what I want to do in this case. I want to change everything. Now, before I do that, I'm going to stop and I'm going to say this. It used to be that you could not undo a time operation, that it just didn't go into the undo queue. And that's not true anymore. It does go into the undo queue, but the undo queue is not always flawless when you undo one of these. I think they've worked most of these bugs out, but I just throw that warning out there. And so it's really simple. Just hit save before you do an edit like this. If you're going to do a really big edit, always hit save, because if something goes really wrong, we can always just come up here and go revert to save. I can't go to revert to save now. It's grayed out because there have been no changes since I saved. But if I delete that and I go, oh, I didn't want to do that, and I'm not sure about the undo queue, I can just reload my session. So saving often is a good habit to get into anyway. But if you're gonna do a big kind of structural edit, just hit save before you do it. So I have my selection. I'm going to go to event, time operations, cut time. I'm going to check start at bar 5, end at bar 10 for a total of 5 bars. I'm going to cut all of my tracks and I'm going to hit apply. And now as I zoom out, what we're going to see is it's done the same edit. Let's listen. Track all the smoothing out still needs to be done, but the structural part was correct. And in addition to that, it sorted out my markers and my metric changes in the meter ruler there. So it's just a more efficient method of making the cut than putting it into shuffle mode and using the all group and everything. By the way, I was unwise. When you do anything with all group, immediately go back and unclick on the all so that all is disabled, because that can cause you all kinds of havoc. If you particularly, if I zoom in on something here and I go into a mode where I'm only seeing that track, if I go like, I just want to get rid of that. And, oh, I'm going to be really happy with that. And then I get out of it. It did it to everything, right? That's an easy one to undo, but I have gotten myself I've backed myself into a corner with that all group on a couple of occasions. So if you engage it, just do what you're going to do and then disengage it. So we've successfully done our cut time. That finishes this page. We want to smooth this out now. So the most obvious thing, of course, is the vocal pops in. So she said the word I on the 8th note before the downbeat here. So what I need to do is restore that now. So I'm in my smart cursor, right? I've got my 3 tools selected up there. And if I hover over the leading edge of this clip, I'll get my my little bracket trimmer tool, right? This one shows up. And if I just click and drag to the left, I can get back however much audio is there. That's actually the beginning of the audio file. And so that's really handy, because then that lets us do edits right to downbeats and not, it used to be, we try to find where this point is and we put ourselves into a relative mode on our grid. So you could work to the grid, but it would always offset you a certain amount. But it's so much easier if you can just put yourself on the grid and, I'll just separate this and delete this. You can do it all day long. You can always get it back. And And so that's super easy. And I think if we listen to the piano, we'll hear the piano comes in just a little bit ahead of Debbie. Yeah, those sound clipped. So I'll just drag that back a little bit. The guitar is going to need a little more editing, so I'm not going to do that now. I bet the bass, we should give it some breath, and that's it. That's all that's playing. So let me just listen to where I'm at. I'll clear my solo. You can clear solo by unclicking the solos, but there's also in the transport menu up here, there's all these little information indicators down here. And when a track is soloed, there's a yellow solo. And when a track is muted, there's an orange M for mute. For the solo, you can click on that to clear it. That'll clear all the solos. You can't clear mutes that way. And Avid's thinking is you can do a lot of harm by accidentally unmuting everything. So they're not giving us that ability. They give you that as a warning if you're bouncing or rendering something out. Just be sure you're aware something is muted. But so I'm unsoloed, and I just want to listen to this edit.
I hate how you think.
So I think if I mute the guitar, all those edits will sound okay.
I hate how you think.
So that's all fine. So the click that I'm hearing is just a problem in the guitar edit. So this is trickier, what we're trying to accomplish here. And it's not going to be flawless. We'll make it fine and it'll work in context, but it'll never be perfect because fundamentally, he's playing two pretty radically different things. He also steps out of time a little bit as he comes into the sound beat. So I'm going to keep my edit point where it is. So I've got this is the intro clip. So that's ending of bar 4. And then this is the beginning of verse 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to crossfade between the two. And a couple ways to do this. The way I describe in the coursework is I'm going to go into slip mode. I don't necessarily want to do this on the grid. So I could click on that up here in the upper left, or I'll just hit F2. And I'm going to grab about half a beat, about an 8th note to either side of my edit point. And I'm going to bring up a crossfade menu. I'm going to do that with Command F. I'm going to cancel this. I can also hit F. F on keyboard focus will execute a fade with all of the preferences that you've set for the fade. Command F will bring up a menu and let you choose what you want to do. How you want to approach it's entirely up to you. If you're crossfading between two correlated audio signals, two things, the same person speaking and you've done an edit, a guitar and you've done an edit like this one, you want to use an equal power fade. You want that logarithmic curve on the up and down, and that will sound most natural between those two. You won't hear an audible dip in the middle. If I do an equal gain curve, this is actually going to get quiet in the middle. Now, if you're fading non-correlated material, if you're doing something cool and you've got a buzz saw going into a reverse cymbal or something, not that I've ever done anything like that, then you got to play around with your fade. And sometimes an equal gain fade sounds better for that. Anyway, I'm going to use an equal power, and I'm just going to listen to this. Not bad. It's not flawless, but. And I think once we put it in context, I don't think I'll even notice that.
I hate.
So there's a little oddity because of how he's picking into this downbeat that we're starting to hear. And I could mess around with this fade a little bit and try to see what I'm doing here is I've just clicked in the center. If I come in the center, you see my icon changes to this square with kind of an X and some different stuff in the middle of it. Probably the worst description of an icon ever, but you see the icon. And if I click now, I can push left or push right and kind of make that fade slightly asymmetrical. So that might improve this or it might not. Let me try.
I hate
It's actually nicer because I'm not getting as much energy from the verse 2 clip before the edit point. Yeah, that sounds nice to me.
I hate,
Okay, so we'll call that good. I always feel like I've done a good day's worth of work when I have some weird looking fades like that. So
Hey, Andrew, how do you delete a fade once you put it in?
that's an excellent question. Click. So if I click on this track here, and more to the point, like if I wanted to redo this fade, I would have to get rid of this one. I can't put another fade in here. If I click outside the fade, I can't grab the fade. I'm only getting part of it. But if I click with the grabber in the fade, this is actually the fade that's selected and not any audio. And if I hit my delete key, all I'm deleting is the fade. You can also grab a region and go to edit, fades, and delete. And that will delete any fades that are contained in that region. Sometimes if you're doing some really detailed work, you can have several fades in a very small area. And when you zoom out, they're not incredibly obvious to see. And then you're trying to do a fade and it won't let you, and it can get really frustrating. And if that ever happens, just grab the region, go fades, delete. You see, if there's no fades there, it won't let me do it. But yeah, you can delete fades either way. Clicking so that just the fade is highlighting and hit the delete key, or using edit menu fades and delete.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I was trying to get rid of a fade the other night.
It's not obvious how to do that.
Driving me crazy.
I hate,
Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm gonna move on. We need to trim the first part of chorus 2. There's part of chorus 2 we wanna remove from the song. We want to make it a half chorus. So I'm gonna, I'm behaving badly here because I don't have my windows configured very well. Really, I should make room for my memory locations to live. And there's a thing called Windows configurations. You go to Window, Configurations, and the list. Now this is a new session, so it doesn't have any here. But let me just import some from another session. So this is kind of my, well, it's a pretty small list actually. So these are all for a much larger screen. They're for a screen that's twice the size. So if I try to engage them, it's going to look pretty bizarre. But you can save different presets, which can be quite handy for working. So if my basic workflow will look like, I wish I had clicked on that. Just have to rebuild this. No problem. I'll keep my memory locations in view at all times. I'll have my Windows configuration list up just so I can get at it. I usually put the automation panel, which we're going to talk about in a later class, over here so I can see when I've set that there. And then I take my off that edge. I shorten my edit window a little bit so I can see my mix window, which lets me just click there to get it. And then I also shorten the mix window. So moving between them, I can always use my command and the equal sign, but I can also see them and easily click, because sometimes I don't want to move my hand off my keyboard. The Windows memories can recall the configurations of the Windows as well. So you see this one that I had recalled here was showing all the inserts and send, which eats up a lot of screen if you're on a small screen. So I'm just going to turn some of this stuff off. And I can actually size that down to there. So this is, for me, kind of a good layout. If the screen's getting small and I need more edit space, I'll close the sidebars so that I can't see my tracks and my groups or my clip list when I do that. but then that kind of maximizes the amount of room I have over here. I rarely close the left-hand one, but the groups list especially is kind of important for me to see. But the clips list, I don't really use that much. So, okay, so we need to go to chorus 2. Go back into grid mode, F4. We want to cut out the first bar of this chorus, and we want, so this chorus will ultimately start with the lyric, and I've been here before. So I'm just going to listen from the start of chorus 2.
Here we go again, here we go again. I know that I should not be here, but I am here again. And I tell myself I'm strong enough not to fall, but then I don't know what's happening. Whoa, and I've been here before.
So bar 35 is where that lyric starts, which makes sense. That's 4 bars into an 8-bar chorus, so that's the middle. I'm going to do playback again, and I'll just drop a memory location there. I could have just clicked there and pressed on that, but either way it's fine. I'm going to call that show 2, just so I know what that is. And what I want to do is the same cut time operation. I want to remove this from the song. So I'm going to select between these markers. Doesn't matter what track I'm selecting on, because fundamentally all I'm doing is defining the space on the timeline. So I can see I've got, this is a 4-bar selection. It looks right to me here. So I'm going to save my work, Command S. Event, time operations, cut time. Start at 31, end at 35 for a length of 4 bars. And I'm gonna do it to all of it. So I'm gonna hit apply. And I'm gonna back up and take a listen to this. Okay, certainly needs some fine tuning, but structurally that's correct. The most noticeable thing is the vocal changes dramatically. So I think I need to make a decision here about what the transition doesn't work. So what I want to do is see if I can use my trimmer tool and bring back whatever the vocal is she was singing going into the second part of the chorus. So just to make it obvious what I'm going to do, I'm just going to grab this last bit. So just her whoa coming out of verse 3 and going into the chorus. I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to replace it with whatever she was singing into the second half of the chorus. So it's just a different whoa to get her into that correct range. So I'm only doing that by deleting and dragging with the trimmer tool, just so you see what I'm doing. Because fundamentally, if I undo that and put everything back to where it was, I'll undo that separate clip. All I have to do is drag that vocal back, and it's gonna take care of getting rid of that audio underneath there. Now, what's handy is as you look at this, I'm seeing both waveforms as they overlap. It's a little hard to see in this whoa because they're both pretty loud, but I guess I could default my horizontal zoom, and that's a little more obvious. So I can see that's a pretty good, just visually, that's a pretty good fit for that. And let's listen.
I forget that I hate you. Whoa, and I've been here before. I've been.
So that's, I haven't even done a crossfade on the breath, and that sounds pretty good.
Whoa.
Breath pattern. I'm gonna go to slip mode, F2. I'm gonna grab the space here, Command F, put a little fade there. Another way to do a fade with my smart cursor. Remember, if I'm near the end of a cursor, the end of a clip, I get the trimmer tool. depending on which clip I'm hovering, I can have my trimmer tool go to the left or the right. If I go to the top and I grab, I get a fade out if I'm near the end of the clip. And same thing, a fade in if I'm at the beginning of the clip. If I go to the bottom, I get that crossfade. And it's going to use whatever my preference for crossfade is. My preference is set to this equal power. And so that's maybe easier than grabbing this and pressing F. Maybe easier than grabbing that, pressing Command F and selecting that. Doesn't really matter. Whatever works best for you.
Whoa.
You know, what's interesting is, let me really listen and hear if I can. I'm going to make this louder. Hear if I can see if I can hear an edit.
Ooh.
It's pretty amazing to me that I did that big chop there, and I don't hear an edit, which is, you know, neither here nor there. We just got lucky that they were kind of at a it's not at a zero crossing, but they're both at a similar place relative to the center line. Generally speaking, for any edit, I'm going to put a fade over it, because even if I don't notice the clip at the moment, if I don't notice a click or a pop or something, that doesn't mean it's not there, and I might notice it later. So just as a general rule of practice, if there's any audio on a track and an edit like there are in these drums, the bass, the guitar here or something, I'm gonna do some sort of crossfade, even if I don't hear a click, just to be safe. Now here, where there's no audio, and I'll zoom in vertically to show that there's no audio there. There's no point. I mean, you can put a fade there. You can not put a fade. It doesn't matter. You can grab all that and delete it. It doesn't matter. Because if there's no audio, there's the edit can't make a noise, so it's nothing to be concerned about. Oh boy, here we go.
Ooh. Whoa.
So that feels pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and put this up the volume. So this is a good thing to show you. We adjusted volume before by going to the mix window and dragging the fader here. But I just brought that volume up without going to the mix window. And that's because in the edit window, where the numeric indication of the volume is, I can just click there. And when I click and hold, the fader comes up and I can adjust that fader. And whatever I do here, minus 28.8, that's the position the fader is going to be in the mix window. That's the same fader. It's not like there's two faders. If you're not at 0 and you want something at 0, hold Option and click on it. That'll put it at 0. That's how I got it up to 0 really quickly. You get it back to 10, I'm going to drag close to 10, then I'm going to hold my Command key down, which gives me a precision, a little more precision in the range. I'll put that at 10. So you can see that.
Whoa. Never, never, forever.
The rest of this, the edits aren't terrible, but they need to be cleaned up a little bit. So the first thing I'll do is just, there's more guitar there. I don't want that. So I'm just going to do a gentle, short fade in on this guitar, just so I'll undo that. Let's just listen to the start of this. So bad, there's no click. That's pretty close to right when he's doing the downbeat, but I'll just put a super short. That's a 5 tick fade. So bars, beats were in, this is a 4/4 bar, so there would be 4 beats in a bar. A beat, one beat is made up of 960 ticks. So if I were to just demonstrate, I'll go to grid mode here. And I have grabbed one beat now. This is between the downbeat and beat 2 of this bar. If I go out of grid mode and I'm going to hold Shift and just shorten this edit selection very slightly. Oh, I'm not gonna do that right. Hold down the F key. Hit the bar. Go to slip. Hold down Shift. Hold down Shift and just shorten that edit selection. you'll see my length, looking at the counter here, the length of this is 956. And so if I get almost bang onto that, I get to 959 before I cross over to B. So a tick is 1/960th of a beat. The beat is obviously defined by the tempo. So these are all relative numbers. But one, so my point of all that is this fade up here is 5/960ths of a beat. And a beat is a little less than a second because we're slightly above 60 beats per minute. So the only point of that is this is an incredibly short fade. I'm not trying to make an audible fade into this. I'm just trying to get it to not jump in unexpectedly. It's fine. In the second guitar here, I see there was a little bit that was essentially an anticipated downbeat. I'll get rid of that. I'll put a little fade into whatever he's playing there. Nice. My acoustic guitar looks like it'll be a little more trouble. Yeah, he's arpeggiating into a downbeat. So I think what I'll do is extend the source clip forward, because his downbeat on this is a little, there's a little breathing in the playing of this, which is absolutely fine. And then I'm going to do my crossfade at this point rather than right on the beat. Let me see what that sounds like. It's pretty good. That's not flawless, but it'll be fine in context. Bass. So with bass, with a signal that's low in frequency, it's much easier to hear a click in an edit. I'll play that again and listen as we cross this zero crossing. You'll hear a click, a high frequency click, right? Because it's dealing with something that's closer to DC in terms of the frequency of the signal, and that just makes it more audible when there's a little misalignment. So I'll just do a crossfade in here. Again, it doesn't have to be a very long crossfade. So without the fade, click, and with fade, click's completely gone, doesn't affect anything else. It looks like all of the drum stuff is a little off the grid. So I think what I'll do, just watch the waveform as I use my trimmer tool to extend the chorus part 2 further back. I can see he's playing a very similar pattern. He's just, the times are slightly off. So I'm just going to extend that all the way back to cover up the closest part to this. Here I'll probably just go with that one. Snare, that's just noise. Hi-hat, looks fine there. Tom will be fine with the crossfade. That's true. So now, rather than doing individual fades for all of these, I'm gonna grab all of those and I'm gonna bring up, actually, I'm not gonna do it that way. I'm gonna grab all of those and I'm just gonna hit the F key. It's not right. Let's see here. I guess that only works for multiple fades on the same track. I thought I was going to go a little quicker. So I'll have to do this the slightly slower way than what I wanted to, which is no big deal. I'll grab. There's a command you can use to create multiple fades, and you can define what the length of those fades are. And so you can grab a bunch of edit selections and define that. But it's not giving you that option now. I think maybe that's designed for fades on a single track, when you have multiple fades on a single track. Okay, so picks look good. I didn't deal with the piano yet. It doesn't look like. Yeah, I hear a click there. So tiny crossfade. And everything together. Oops. What happened was I went to click on the upper part of the track here to start playback from there, so I could go into this edit point. But I clicked on the bottom, and when I hit play, it started playback from the beginning of the track. So,
that I hate you. Whoa, never knew before, I've been hurt before.
that's great. That sounds very good to me. I don't hear any of the edits.
Hate you. Whoa, never knew before, I've been hurt before.
That's going to be great. You know, don't be all that concerned when you're editing something like this and you see things that are pushing and pulling off the grid a little bit. You know, a really good musical performance will breathe. And this drummer is keeping excellent time. It's not like he's drifting off the rest of the band. He's just letting it breathe a little bit. That sounds very good. So that makes this series of edits, you know, ever so slightly more complicated, but not really. So, you know, don't look at something like that and think, oh, I can't edit to the grid because of that. You just need to be aware of it. And I believe we've completed the assignment. Let's see here. Yeah, so those are all the edits. So this is now, we've now edited the song into the new form that was requested for whatever it was going to be used for. I'll just make all my tracks a little smaller here. I'm doing that. I'm affecting lots of them by holding the Option key down and selecting the size that I want. You can also hold the Option key down. If you hover between two tracks, you can change the track on one. But if you hold the Option down, they'll all do it as well. So okay, I'll look at it. And so that's the edit process. Now the next step we're going to do is we're going to mix this. We're not going to do any plugins. We're not going to do any EQ. We're going to do level and panning, and really focus on what those tools can give us. And that's going to be the end of this project. Does anyone have any questions about the edit I did before we move on to mixing?
I got a question, Andrew.
Yes.
Is there a way, I can see your grid lines on your specific tracks. I don't have that on mine. How do you get the,
Does yours look like this?
yeah, but yeah, it looks like that. But before you had specific grid lines.
So where I set my grid up here in the toolbar,
Yep.
the word grid, if you click on that, it will highlight and that will display the grid.
Genius.
If I click on it again, it will go away.
Got it. Okay, thanks.
Some people don't like to see it. I don't know what the point of having a grid is if you can't see it, but that is just.
Yeah. Yeah, like seeing if the, you know, if the kick drum lines up and stuff, it's, you know, it's easy. It's handy
Yeah, I
to see. grid
Yeah,
line.
that's, you know, I mean, I guess in theory, I could try to look up here and think about where that might be down there, but you know,
Right.
that's not remotely precise, right? So, yeah.
Okay, great, thanks.
Anybody else? Save my work. Okay, so we're gonna go forward into the process of mixing. This exercise is set up for us to only use faders and panning and not do anything else. And that's not to say that there aren't things in this song that would benefit from EQ, reverb, any number of other tools that are available to us in the mixing process, dynamics certainly. But it's important to remember that we need to we need to approach this in a certain logical order. And before I'm as guilty or perhaps more guilty than most at, I'll get into something and I'll be like, oh, that it's the tonality of that acoustic guitar, and I'll get into Q and I'll start digging stuff out of there. And it's like putting the finish on the drywall in your house before the drywall's been nailed to the studs. You know, I mean, it's completely out of order, and you're going to cause yourself, odds are, you're going to cause yourself problems later down the road. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a situation where, you know, something's just got a super obvious problem and it might be easier to mix it if you address the tonality or dynamics at first. But I think it's a good exercise to remind ourselves of the power of how much one can accomplish with just a fader and a band knob. So as our setup, all the tracks are routed to mix. I have a bus here that brings the bus entitled mix, excuse me, I have an aux input, brings the bus entitled mix back in and is routing it to the speakers. And that's how I'm hearing this. If I play back,
I know that
and if I mute the mix, that's everything goes away. That's how I know
I tell I'm
what I'm going through there. And this is very handy because as we get a little further on in our mixing, we'll probably discover that there are some overall processing priorities we would like to accomplish on the unified whole. So while we might address some dynamics on the bass and some EQ on this and whatever else, I might want to do some overall dynamics, a little gentle squeeze on this bus. I might want to do some overall tonality to the song, and the mix bus will provide us that opportunity. I'm going to take this one step further, and I'm going to add what I call a print track. Now, when we mix something in here and we're ready to send it to the outside world, there are many ways we can do that, and perhaps the most common is to just define the range of our timeline we want. So from pickup to end, you know, that's our whole song there, right? And I could just hit bounce mix, and that's just going to render out a mix based on what we're listening to on our output, and it's going to do all the math offline, and we're gonna trust it to do it correctly. And 95% of the time it will do it correctly. It really works pretty well. But for me, that leaves a big step of the process out, which is when I'm working and I'm editing and stuff, I'm always thinking about little details. And if I take a moment to record my mix in my session here, I get a couple benefits from that. One, I have the final version of the mix, or whatever my most recent version of the mix is, existing as its own audio file in here. And I always know where that is, and I can always get that. It's not like I rendered the file, I put it in some other folder, and I forgot about it. Now I don't know where it is. But the other part of that is when I'm printing the track, when I'm physically listening to it in real time as it's going through and printing, I do some of my best listening in that time. That's a time when I felt like I was done before I hit record on that. And so now I can sit back and from a macro range, be really hypercritical about what I'm listening to. And, you know, I'll go through on some projects and I'll print 4 bars and I'm like, no, I missed this. And then I'll go and print again. I'll get another 2 bars. Oh, no, I missed this and stuff. And I'll get just a whole nother level of polish on top of it that I wouldn't have gotten if I had just, you know, rendered it offline, sent it off to the world, and that was that. So there are a couple ways to create a print track. We could send the output of the mix. Well, let me just do this. This is not the best way to do it, but it is functional. I could just send my output here, instead of going to my speakers, I could send that to a new track. And instead of making an aux input, I'll make it an audio track. So I'm going to create a stereo audio track. I'm going to call this print. It created this up here because my kick was selected. It will always create a new track next to whatever's selected. If nothing's selected, it'll put it at the bottom. Now, when I press play, we won't hear anything. It's going through the mix, it's going to print, but because this is an audio track, it's trying to play me what's on the track here, and there's nothing on the track here. So I need to put this into an input monitor mode, and that's what the I is here. When I press this, we'll hear it. We should hear it. I have to put the output to my speakers, of course. And so now, when I press it,
I know that I should not be.
we will hear it. And this is fine. I can work now. I have to solo defeat this. And I have to keep this in input mode, or I have to be physically recording to hear it.
That I hate.
The only problem with this is if you get a more complicated setup where you've got a lot of, we don't have any subgroups in here. We've just got one mix bus, no other groups. You've got a lot of subgroups, a lot of different processing routes. You can get yourself to a point where the delay compensation, when we add inserts and when we route things through different buses, the audio paths start to take a different amount of time to complete those operations. And Pro Tools is very smart and compensates for that, so everything lines back up. But an input monitor track messes with that a little bit, and you have to get to a pretty complicated situation before it's a problem. But you can get yourself into quite a problem where you're no longer hearing the correct delay compensation, and you listen, and go, I don't understand what's going on. And if you record it and get out of listen mode and go back and play it back, it'll actually be correct. But it's a terrible, terrible way to work. And so for that reason, I don't like to do it like this. So I'm gonna delete this. I am going to go to my IO and delete the bus that's entitled print, because I want to create that again. That's A-okay. So now I'm going to leave my mix assigned to my main output. What I want to do is I want to send this to two places. So right now it's going just to my main outputs. If I hold down the control key, I can select a second or 3 or 4. I can select multiple outputs for this. So I'm holding down control. So the speaker is going to stay selected. I'm going to add a new track. I'm going to add a stereo audio track, and I'm going to call this print as well. Now, the fundamental difference between what I've done is, you see this, there's a plus sign next to the little text for control room main here. And if I hover, it shows me my output selection is going to control room main, and then to my outputs. And then it's also going to this track called print, or it's a bus called print, which is coming back to an audio track. So now I'll just mute this print track. I can still hear, right? I can still hear my mix because it's going to my speakers as well. But if I put it in input monitoring here, you'll see that it's also coming into print. Now, this creates another potential problem, which is if I route this to my main output, I'll have the song will just get twice as loud. Right. It's time aligned, so it's not doing anything destructive, but that's not my mix. And if I were to look at my metering, things would be completely out of whack. So then I create a bus. You do two things. You can just keep this muted. I don't like to rely on myself remembering to do that. So I create a bus, new path, doesn't matter if it's stereo or mono, truly. And I call it nowhere. Asterisk. And all this is a bus that has no routing. It's not going to go to an output, and I'm not going to use it as an input to an aux-in track anywhere. And so I just put that as nowhere. So I can't hear this track. If you just tell it to not have an output, the track's not active, and you're messing with some other components inside of Pro Tools that is dealing with dynamic voicing. And so it's not great to be recording to a track that doesn't have an output. So this nowhere bus is kind of a workaround for that. The track is active. I can't hear it. So as I'm
Not to fall, but then I don't know what's
mixing,
happening.
I can put myself in record mode.
Oh, and I've been here before, I've been hurt before. I know that I'll regret it just like every time before.
And now I have a print of that small section. Now, of course, I can't hear this, and you absolutely will when you're very happy with the very, very final print that you've got. You need to listen to it, make sure that there aren't any errors, particularly if you punch in and out, that you don't get a weird click or something. And then at that point, you've got to route it to your speakers. And then I just mute my mix at that point because that's easy to do.
Happening. Oh, and I've been here before.
And that's my print. And then from here, I can export it. I can do whatever I want to with it. We'll look at that in a little bit. But fundamentally, does anyone have any questions about what a print track is and why I think that's a good way of working?
I'm gonna play that back on YouTube at a different playback speed so I can get that. But actually, the preferred way, could you kind of verbally bullet point the creation of the new print track, the way you did it the second?
Yes, yes. And there's also in Project 2, in the paperwork for Project 2, there's a YouTube link to a YouTube video that's dedicated to creating a print track. But let me just do it here so that we're all clear on it. I'm just gonna undo, see, I'll just delete the buses and set up IO, bus tab. When I delete a bus that's being used, the text is bold here, so I know it's being used. It's warning me that I'm gonna cause some problems, particularly if any automation had been written. This would not be undoable. If I deleted a bus that I had written automation on, the automation would not, I would never be able to get it back. So I'm not being cavalier about hitting delete here. I just know what that's doing. I know I'm not gonna cause myself a problem. So this is the state we were in when we did the edits. Everything's going to the mix bus. The mix bus is coming to an aux input. It's the input of this aux input. And the aux input is routing to my control room speakers. And this is how I'm hearing. This is the listen path. The listen path is any track, I'll solo the bass, coming through the mix, going to my speakers. That's how I'm hearing.
If I hate a lot,
So if this is my listen path, this is what I want to print. This is my mix. This is what I want to have my final version, that when I send it to somebody else and they play it on their device, that they hear the same thing that I heard. So I'm going to route to 2 locations at once. I want this to continue to route to my speakers. So I will hold down my control key, not my command key, my control key. That's on Mac control. And I'm going to choose new track. A stereo, by default, it's gonna, when you're doing an output, it assumes you want it to send it to an aux input because that's the most normal way of working. So that will come up by default. It came up as audio track this time because I had just created one like that. But keep an eye on that because it's very easy to accidentally create an audio an aux input for your print track, which won't let you print the audio. So a stereo audio track, time base of samples is fine, and we will name it print. And so that did 2 things for me. That created this audio track. It named it print. I'm sorry, it did a 3rd thing. It created a new bus. If I'll just hover and let the pop-up come. It created a new bus, and this output is now routing to my main listen path as well as the bus entitled print. I want to make sure that this print track does not accidentally route to somewhere where I'm going to hear it in combination with my mix, because my mix is still going to my speakers. So I will create a bus, and I will entitle it Nowhere. I'll do this in all my sessions. In fact, as we'll see later when we talk about working with templates, you can have it pre-existing in a template, so you don't have to create it every time. It really doesn't matter whether it's a stereo or a mono path for this instance. I'm going to title it asterisk Nowhere. The asterisk just makes it easier to see in a list for me. There's no function that provides. We see a difference here. See this, the Nowhere text is not bold. that means nothing's routing to it at the moment. So if we had a bunch, if I created a bunch of default buses here, which I did just by clicking on default, you see they're not bold because nothing's assigned. I'll just get rid of those. Some people like to have a ton of buses available in their session. I find it just kind of messy, but it doesn't cause any problems. Some people will like to build some routing to subgroups and stuff and just use existing buses rather than creating new buses. That's fine. So I'm going to set my output to the, did I delete my nowhere? I think I did. New path, one, stereo, star. Okay. Change my output bus, nowhere. So now I cannot hear this track. The track is active, it has an output, but I can't hear that output. And this is the condition that I would be in for most of my mixing. And then after I'd gotten something that felt like my final print on here, I would then route this to my speakers and mute my mix to listen to that.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Okay, you're very well. So see what our goals for the day. So I just want to talk briefly about mixing. Mixing is an incredibly subjective process. No two people will mix something exactly the same. There isn't a clear black and white, what's right, what's wrong. It's about how you hear, it's about how you enjoy music. And so it's a pretty personal process to everybody. So what I will share with you are kind of my approaches to it, which may work for you and may not work for you. And if they don't work for you, that's absolutely fine. That's one step along the path of finding what does work for you. In my experience, people tend to hear music in two different ways. If you're talking about a combination of a lot of instruments, not just a solo piano or something, but anything from a jazz combo up to something much larger, people tend to listen bottom up or top down. And what I mean by that is some people focus on the key melodic elements, like a vocal or a saxophone playing a solo or whatever. And that's where they begin to perceive the music. And the rest of the music kind of exists around that. And other people tend to hear bottom up. They tend to hear the driving parts of the rhythm in the low end and the fundamental foundation of the harmonics, which are usually in a bass guitar, in a tuba, but anything down in that range. And it's interesting to talk to people and listen. Some people play instruments, and the instrument they play tends to influence the way they hear things. It's the way they perceive is a better way to say it. And mixers tend to approach songs in a similar way. There are top-down mixers and there are bottom-up mixers. So some people will get a vocal, get a level that they want, get a tonality that they want, and then try to build the song around that. And that makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways. It's never been how I've approached mixing. I wouldn't say I'm strictly speaking a bottom-up mixer or even a bottom-up listener. Although I will tell you, it took me a long time to figure this out, but like most people, particularly when I was younger, I just love to listen to music in the car, driving fast and singing loud, right? And our cars weren't very quiet back then, so there was a lot of noise. Maybe the windows were down or whatever. But if you were in a situation where there was a lot of low frequency rumble, I would there'd be a song that I know really well, and I'd be trying to sing along, and I couldn't. I'd miss. I wouldn't be in the right key. I'd be trying to go for a note, and I couldn't quite hit it. And listen, I'm no singer, But even within the accepted realms of bad car singing, I was doing poorly. And it took me a long time to figure out that when there was enough noise, low frequency noise around the foundations of the harmonics, that I couldn't identify the key very well. It would take me a long time. It could be a song I knew really well, and I'd be like, wow, why can't I, why can't I quite figure out what the next note is? And it's just the way that I hear the key based on that lowest fundamental part of the music, that root motion, which is usually in a bass guitar in modern music at least. And so that's the way I approach mixing as well. I like if we're talking about a traditional song, something like this or like the next one we're going to work on, I will want to get the drums technically aligned, and then I will want to get the drums blended together, and then I will want to get the bass functioning well with them. The kick, drum, and bass guitar are fundamentally the same instrument. They're two different people playing them, but musically they should function together and get that working very well. And then I'll start to build harmonics around there, and then I'll start to think about melodic elements and eventually get to a vocal. So that's just how I approach. That's not to say that that's the right way or the wrong way, but it's an approach that works for me. So in a mix like this, one thing just from experience that I know is when you've got two microphones in close proximity. So like we have here with the kick in and the kick out. So to me, assuming they were accurate when they named these tracks, that to me means there's a microphone inside the kick drum between the two heads, and then another microphone on the outside of not the beater head, but the back head furthest away from the drum. So those mics are relatively close together, but they're not in the exact same space. And so that pretty much, it doesn't guarantee, but that points to a potential time alignment issue. If you've got two mics that are 10 feet apart, they've got so much different information most of the time that you're not going to have a time alignment issue between the two of them. If you've got two mics relatively close together, they're hearing the same source, but they're out of time with each other, and that's a potential problem. A top and a bottom snare mic. Sometimes you've got a lot of toms. The tom mics are close together. You need to be aware. So I'm gonna just take a listen here. You could zoom in, you could look really closely at the waveform, but I find fundamentally there's a really simple approach to this, which is solo one of them. I'm going to go ahead and just turn this up a little bit. This will probably be a little hard to hear over Zoom, but I hope it comes through. It's a pretty nice sounding mic. So I'm going to start that playback again, and I'm going to add the second mic to it. I'm going to listen to refresh my ear to just this microphone, and then I'm going to listen to the combination of the two. And if I hear the body of the sound either disappear slightly or I start to lose some low frequency, then that's going to point to me that there's a polarity, there's a time alignment issue that might be able to be solved with polarity. It's not a polarity issue, but I might be able to solve it with that. So I'm just going to start playback again. Adding this, I did it wrong. I'm going to add the second one. Okay, so I noticed two things. One, the second mic's pretty loud. Don't love the tonality. And second of all, I heard a lot of the low frequency, the very low frequency, go away from this. Take this away. So to me, I've got an issue that I need to address here. Now, maybe I'm not going to use this mic, just because somebody sends you 50 tracks doesn't mean a song needs 50 tracks worth of microphones. And a lot of time, a good mixer is also a really judicious editor on what they're choosing to use. But kick in and out can have a nice blend. Give a, this kick is pretty dead. And if I didn't have an out mic, I'd probably be tempted to add some reverb to that. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can cause some other problems. so I just want to look at this now that I think I know I've got a problem. Zooming way in. I mean, there's not much of an arrival point difference. There's a slight. So I don't think I really want, I could attempt to try to drag the second track to line it up. I don't think I want to do that because I'm always worried that then this microphone is outside of the drum kit, meaning it's hearing some other things as well. And if I start to move where it sits on the timeline, I could create some new problems. So what I want to do is just try to flip the polarity of one of them and see if it solves the issue. So I think what I'm going to do is on the outer mic, there's no dedicated polarity plugin. It's just a function of many. This is a built-in plugin that Avid makes called Trim, and all it does is let you, if you need to turn the track down and you don't want to do it on the fader, this will turn it down, or this is a 60 dB gain. It also has a polarity button on it, so I'm just going to use it for that. I'm going to turn that on, and I'm just going to listen and see if it solves my problem. I think it did. I hear most of the low frequency that was missing come back. I think the mix is off between the two. I'll just turn this down a little bit. That kind of sounds like a good drum. So, whenever you're in a situation where you've got multiple tracks right on top of each other, multiple microphones right on top of each other, just pay attention to the alignment. Snare over and under microphones, the one microphone is above the snare pointing towards the floor, one microphone is below the snare pointing up, and in theory the sound wave is going to move the elements in different directions. Those tend to be out of polarity naturally. And just one word of caution. A few years ago, I thought, you have these overhead microphones that are hearing all of the drums. You have these spot microphones on the drums, and there's a lot of bleed, and like everything's out of time with each other. Like, wouldn't it be great to get everything just an absolute perfect time alignment? And I had a session where the way it was recorded, that was actually possible. I could go and physically drag the tracks and get everything aligned. I used the latest arrival time, which is the overheads. It's my alignment point, dragged everything back to that. And I listened to it, and it didn't sound like a drum kit at all. And I just came to the realization that we've been listening to drum kits with all these multiple timing issues going on since the invention of a drum kit and the recording. And so that's just part of the sound of the instrument. So you can try that for yourself sometime if you want to, but I have never found that to be really successful. So then from here, I'll just mute everything other than the drum kit, and I'm just going to work on a blend. I suspect I've got the kick too loud. I brought that up to 0 just to make it easier to hear the issues. So I'm just going to move those two faders relative to each other. The overheads have a stereo image to them if they're recorded correctly. And overheads will either present the drum kit in the drummer's perspective or the audience's perspective. Do I hear the hi-hat to the left or to the right? If I hear it to the left, odds are it's drummer perspective. And if I hear it to the right, odds are it's audience perspective, unless we have a strange drum kit. That's further into the left here. So either is fine. It doesn't matter which way you mix, but you should make a conscious choice as to which way you're presenting it in your mix. And then the panning, any panning you do on these instruments, you don't want to be fighting with the images in the overhead. So I'm actually gonna flip my. So I've got the hi-hat is more to the right now, and then I'm gonna move the close mic a little off center to try to match that image. That helps me present a little more. If you're panning and you're fighting the imaging in the overheads, it gets a little washy and there's just a little less clarity to it. So you really want to think about, carefully listen to what the overhead is doing. Now, the snare will not be centered in the overheads. You get into a question of whether or not you really want to pan your snare off center. Generally speaking, you want to keep your bass lined up in the center. Generally speaking, you want to keep your snare pretty close to the center. You're going to put your lead vocal at least right in the center, and then everything else you're going to build in the sound field around them. So when I record overheads, when I'm recording a drum kit, I'm setting up the overheads. I actually position the overheads. I'll use a tape measure to measure the time between the snare drum and the microphone, and I'll position the overheads to put the image of the snare in the center of that, so that I don't have that kind of smear of the imaging in fighting between where I put the close mic on the snare and where the overhead is. But if you're not recording it, you don't have any choice. The snare is not centered in those overheads. And so I don't think I'm going to pan this off center to compensate for that, because that's going to create some other problems. So that I'll just have to live with the fact that that there's a little bit of imaging smear there. I'm going to just add the bass in quickly. I think I'll solo my kicks and my bass. Now, you'll notice I haven't really, I've just been kind of setting relative levels together. I haven't been thinking in terms of an absolute loudness or looking at a meter to see, if I'm getting near my loudness targets for my output, because that can all come later. All I'm worried about are relative balances now. Let's see, we're out of time. Does anyone, I know Gil had to run. Does anyone need to run, or can I take 5 more minutes of your time here?
I'm good, keep going.
I'm good.
So I'm just gonna really want as much of that attack of the kick drum and the downbeat on the bass to feel like a single instrument. There's some pretty large tonality differences between the two, but they feel relatively well blended there. I know the acoustic guitar is going to be a lot of work, so I'm going to add this electric in. It's, mixing from, I have, it's back there now. I have control surfaces with faders, and mixing from faders is great, but 40% of the time I'm away from my studio when I'm having to do mixes, and I mix with my mouse a lot. I mean, it's really no big deal. It's usually in the final part of the process where I really want to do little touch-ups and stuff that I wish I had a fader. But, let me just hear what's happening with this other guitar, which comes in later. So I think at this point, where I've got 2 guitars, but I was back here trying to think of what I wanted to do with the panning. And I didn't really have anything to kind of point me in a direction for that. Put it kind of anywhere. I don't want to keep it on center just to not clutter the center for the vocal. But now where I see I've got two playing together later, that kind of tells me I want to put one side and one the other side. The only thing I want to be careful of is that it doesn't feel oddly out of balance when there's only one of them. It's pretty good. I'm mixing on headphones. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with that, but there's some dangers to be aware of. And one of the dangers is the panning feels very extreme in headphones. I'm also wearing closed back headphones, which are great for isolation, but they give you a very distorted picture of the low end. If you're gonna be doing a lot of mixing with headphones, I'd recommend looking into some open back headphones. I have the Bayer, I think the 880s, which are open back, and they give you a very, very nice reproduction of low frequency. I've mixed some stuff on these headphones and then gone and listened to the places and been so disappointed at the low end, because the low end sounds amazing in these, but that's not what it sounds like everywhere else. So this panning feels a little extreme to me on these guitars. It's like, whoa, that's out there, but on speakers, you know, I can't do it because we're going through Zoom. I was gonna say, if I put it through the speakers, it'll barely feel off center, I would imagine. I can't avoid this acoustic any longer, so I'll just dig into it. So, I've mixed this before, so I know what the problems are already. But the first time I saw this, I knew I was going to have a problem, because by the track name, somebody has stereo mic the guitar, which I think is going to have some fundamental problems to it. And XY miking is putting two mic heads and trying to get them in the exact same spot, you know, the same point in time, but at opposite 45-degree angles. And it's a great way of stereo miking. I never kind of like an acoustic guitar mic like that. If you want a stereo image of a guitar, I would rather come in from two sides. Now, coming in from the two sides will give you some mono compatibility problems if you mono your mix up, but I'd rather deal with those issues than what we're going to hear. I'm going to break this into two mono tracks just to make it a little easier to work with. If I click on my track and hit split into mono, that will leave my existing track and then give me the two mono tracks. So for now, I'm gonna mute the original track, and I can hear what's going on with the individual tracks. It's really not as bad as I remember it. Its image is just a little wide to me. Let's say I've gotten to a point where I'm happy with my balance between these two. So first of all, this is how I'm going to mix it. I'm not going to use the stereo track. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this track. I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to say hide and make inactive. What that's going to do is, if you look at my track list up here, I have a track without the visibility dot next to it. I can restore it by clicking on that dot, but the track is inactive. It's not using any processing power on my computer, and I cannot hear it. I cannot play it back in the state. So I can't accidentally hear two guitars now just because I broke that into different tracks. And if I'm happy with my relative balance here, what I want to do is create a group. Command G, highlight the tracks you want, hit Command G. I'm going to call this ACGTR. I'm gonna make it an edit and mix group. We're gonna look at groups in the next lesson in a little more detail. But that means the faders will be linked as well as any edit commands. Set up the globals for this session. We'll look at that window in greater detail later. So now if I want to adjust the whole thing up or down, they're going to move relative to each other. See, both faders are moving, the relative offsets being maintained.
Andrew, if you wanted to make an adjustment on one of the, like the left acoustic guitar, could you unlatch? How easy
Yeah.
is it?
So there's two ways. You can turn a group as active when it's highlighted here. So if I just unhighlight that, then the group is inactive. Frequently, if you get in a busy mix, I'll have 50 groups or something over there. There's also a keyboard command to suspend all groups. Command Shift G. Command G creates a group. Command Shift G suspends all groups. And that's what I'll do. So I'll just, make a change, suspend the group, make a change, and I just, that Command Shift G is just a shortcut my finger goes to very quickly because I use that a lot. Occasionally you hit F, which is a fine click command. But Command Shift G is group suspended. Piano. Really know how this was recorded. It's not a keyboard, but it's nice. A little stereo width to it. It's a nice sounding instrument.
But I am here again, and I tell myself I'm strong enough to fall, but then you think the world is circling around your head. And I hate how you talk to girls.
Now, I'm doing a static mix right now, and I'm not going to finish this as a static mix. I'm going to write some automation. So as I listen to this, I go, well, the vocal's too quiet relative to the bass that comes in there. But I'm just trying to pick you don't want to automate too early. So I'm just trying to pick a static mix that represents pretty well, the majority of the song. And then I'll go back and do touch-ups later. So
You think the world is circling around your head. And I hate how you talk.
it's probably actually a little level thing I need to fix on the bass rather than the vocal, but I'll leave that for now.
Go again, here we go again. I know that I should not be here, but I am here again.
Love that line.
I don't know what's happening. Whoa, and I've been here before, I've been hurt before. I know.
And so, some people will mix in this window, and I got to tell you, I love mixing in this window because I like the visual feedback in addition to what I'm listening to. And I love that. This is one of the things driving me nuts when I'm working Cubase is you can't mix in this view of the of tracks, and I just find it so helpful.
That I hate you. Whoa, and I've been here before, I've been hurt before. I know that I regret it just like every time before. But in the morning, I look at you, love you more.
I'm going to create a group for piano.
That I hate you. Whoa, and I've been here before, I've been hurt before. I know that I regret it just like every time.
Okay, so that's a very, very quick starting point I'd probably spend another 10 minutes messing around with it before I go back and start writing some automation. But it's pretty important actually to try to mix quickly, because we lose perspective. Human hearing loses objectivity relatively quickly. If you listen to a song 5 times through or something, you're going to get used to some of the problems that exist in it. And so I find it's really, really good to work quickly, work in macro blocks at first, and then come back and work on your details as much as you can. We'll look at automating the mix. We're not gonna automate this mix. We're gonna move on to the next lesson, next session. But we're gonna go through the methods of how to do that. So if you guys want to, I think this is a beautiful little song. You can certainly go through and mix it once we've discussed how to do that. Okay, I'm sorry we went over, but thank you for sticking with me. We didn't get to start project 2, and that's okay. We will start session 3 on Tuesday with that. We're gonna look at templates anyway. If you want to try to work ahead, there's a slightly less descriptive. There's a handout describing project 2 that is screen share, that is slightly less descriptive than project 1. I'm trying to give you a little less information this time, since you in theory know more. But there are all the steps for how to set it up. There are 2 options for setting it up. It's a bigger session. It's, I don't know, 40 tracks or so. Maybe not quite that many. And I'm going to mix it using a pretty detailed template. And you can either set up the template from scratch, which is described in the handout, or you can use the template that I've provided in the files. And there's also, just like this one, there's also a version of it with all of the setup for the session done. So if you don't want to go through those steps, that all exists. So anyway, if you want to look at that before Tuesday, great. If not, we will dig into it then. Does anyone have any questions before we call it a night?
Hey, how did you toggle back and forth between the solo latch and the solo latch?
Okay. Just going to screen again here. Command Shift O will open whatever your most recent session was. That's kind of a handy thing to look at. So solo mode, there are several solo modes. We're using solo in place, not AFL or PFL, but I like mutually exclusive. So when you click on one solo, it's going to cancel the other solo. If you put it in latching mode, as you add solos, it's just additive. But if you set it up in what they call XOR, or what I call mutually exclusive, it's going to clear the solo of the other ones. But if you don't want that function, hold the Shift key down when you're soloing other things, and then it becomes additive. Then it acts like latching. And to me, that's easier than every time I add one, well, I have to unsolo those. Or there's actually not a keyboard shortcut for clear solo, which has been something I've been begging for years. You've got a solo, you can either click on it to unsolo it, or if there's several things soloed, you can go up here. I have a macro mapped on one of my control surfaces to do it, but there's not, like a Command Shift S or whatever to do it, and that's a little annoying to look at. So
Thanks, Andrew.
yeah, sure. Any other questions before we call it a night? Okay, well, thank you all so much. Yeah, go ahead, Gil.
One quick question. I'm sorry, I had to duck out for a little bit.
No problem.
And didn't quite get the point of why you needed the print track. Is it because you're processing the mix track, or are you doing something to it? Or
No, it's fundamentally, once you've processed the mix on your mix track, that's going to, all of that processing will be heading to the speakers through this output. So I could not have a print track and just use a bounce mix command. This used to be called bounce to disk, and they've changed that. And it freaks me out because it was the same for 20 years. And that will render it offline, and it will be very quick, and it will, you know, do all of the dynamics and all the reverbs and all of that stuff, and it's just doing it faster than real time, and that can be really handy. But for me, the print track is part of my mixing process. Is fundamentally when if I start from the beginning here and I put this into record, I'm not mixing, I'm not doing anything else here. All I'm doing is listening as part of the process. I can't change something in my mix because it won't have existed in an earlier part of this print.
I hate
And so that forces me to listen, to just listen and listen with a very critical perspective. And I think that's an incredibly valuable part of the process of having that last step of listening. And certainly there are times when I just need to get something out quickly to somebody where I'll just bounce a mix. But if I'm rendering a mix and I'm going to send it out and I care what people think about it, I'm going to do it this way because let me just really quickly open another session here and this is the next project we're going to get into here, and I'll show you what's happened on my print track.
Because couldn't you just say, okay, I've got my mix, let me listen to it one last time and just sit back and listen? Wouldn't it be the same thing, or?
It would be if you sat there and you did it, but then you wouldn't. Then you'd still have to do your offline bounce. And the other advantage of this is that the file that you printed exists inside your session. There's an option when you do an offline bounce to, after it's bounced it, to re-import it to the session. And you've got to make sure that it lines up and all that stuff. But you don't have to have a copy of your mix inside your session. But you know, I do a lot of things where somebody asked me about a song we did 5 years ago, and we go back and we open it up. And I've had enough times where I've lost data, something changed, I changed computers, not every file came across. Oh, well, that plugin doesn't exist anymore, so I can't process this the same way. You know, so to have just a physical print of what I did right there, no questions asked, is also of great value to me.
Plus, just to add for Gil's, to Andrew's answer, I've made, for some reason, so many mistakes in the bounce out.
Oh, yeah.
I've included
Oh, yeah.
things that I want to, yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing. You know, I always encourage people to get a lightweight audio editor of some sort. I use a thing called Twisted Wave. And whenever you bounce anything out of Pro Tools, you got to go and open it up in that and just look at it, you know, because I mean, I've done that thing where I've emailed the file, you know, they come back, they're like, you sent me 7 minutes of silence.
Exactly.
So anyway, this is a mix I did. This is print _ 59. Now it every time you hit record, it opens that up once. So that means 59 times as I've been mixing, I've gone through and listened to. And if you look at the playlists here, these are all playlists underneath the print track. These are all sections of little things I punched in. You know, and that's part of my process there, that you know, I thought everything was fine before I punched that, right? And then I went, as I was listening, I went, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, or what about? And so, you know, that's just how I work. That's not to say that's how everybody should work. You know, you've got to figure out the best workflow for you. But for me, there's a couple really valuable things. One, this is whatever mix of this that I've shipped. If I've shipped a mix, this is it. And there's no question about that. There's no question about what version you had, what you did that. The one that's sitting on that track right there 100%. That's the mix. That was the last version of the mix that we built. So that's valuable to me, and it's also just the editorial process. And to me, there's something about sitting there and the records going that I just hear differently. You know, my mind is thinking about different things. When I teach people to mix live shows, the first couple of weeks are very frustrating because they're having to read a script, they're having to follow along. And I'm telling you, you can't listen and read at the same time. I mean, you can listen up to a certain degree, but once you can take the script and throw it away, the quality of the mix goes up 100% because so much more of their brain power is going to just listening. And there's something about that process when I'm recording a print track that I'm listening in a different way at that point in the process. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Okay, well, thank you guys very much for spending some time with me tonight. I will, same thing, I'll put the YouTube link up for this as soon as I can, and I will send you guys out a link for Tuesday session. It'll actually be the same link as the one we got. I'll send you another email with that. So I hope you have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you guys next week.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Thank you for the great insight.
You're very
Yeah.
well.
Thanks, Andrew.